Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're jumping right into one of the most incredible, yet somehow totally overlooked underdog stories of the 19th century. We're talking about a literal masterclass in unyielding unity against the massive, well-funded machinery of imperialism. This is a story of Pangeran Antasari. He didn't just fight a war. He masterminded this breathtaking cross-ethnic resistance and used brilliant guerrilla tactics to completely frustrate Dutch colonial rule in South and Central Kalimantan. So, I want you to start by asking yourself this one big question. How exactly did a man who was essentially stripped of his royal power manage to bridge a seemingly impossible cultural divide to fight a common enemy? Just imagine trying to unite coastal, urbanized populations with deep forest traditional tribes. These were groups with completely different ways of life. How on earth did one leader forge them into a single, terrifying force against one of the wealthiest colonial superpowers of the time? Well, let's dive right into the making of this revolutionary, starting with his very grounded beginnings. Born in Kayu Tanggi in the Sultanate of Banjar, which you'd know today as South Kalimantan, his birth name was Gusti Inu Kartapati. Now, he definitely had royal blood flowing through his veins. He was the son of Pangeran Masood and a princess. But despite that elite lineage, his family had been entirely sidelined from the central palace court. So he was royal by birth, sure, but he was very much an outsider by circumstance. And here's exactly why he was on the outside looking in. Antasari was the grandson of Pangeran Emir, who was actually the rightful heir to the Banjar throne back in the late 18th century. But his grandfather's power was usurped by a rival, Pangeran Nada. And how did Nada pull that off? With the heavy backing of the Dutch East India Company. In fact, the Dutch literally exiled Antasari's grandfather to Sri Lanka. I mean, imagine growing up knowing your family had been stripped of their rightful heritage by a foreign corporation. That definitely set the stage for deep-seated, deeply personal grievance with colonial interference. Because his family was pushed out, Antasari grew up far away from the pampered inner royal enclave. Instead, he lived right alongside common villagers and the riverine communities along the Barito Basin. And this is absolutely crucial. This commoner upbringing gave him a level of empathy for the people that the actual ruling elite just didn't have. He saw their economic hardships firsthand. He felt the social oppression from Dutch colonial policies just like the average villager did. For him, this wasn't just political maneuvering. It was the catalyst for his revolutionary worldview. Plus, it gave him the vital grassroots connections he'd later rely on for his guerrilla network. So, how do we get from a sidelined prince to a full-blown rebellion? Let's look at the breaking point. Fast forward to the 1850s, and the Banjar Sultanate is dealing with a major succession crisis. When Sultan Autumn dies in 1857, the Dutch authorities step in and just completely bypass the popular, legitimate heir, Pangeran Hidayatullah. Instead, they install their own hand-picked puppet candidate, Sultan Tamjidillah II. This blatant, heavy-handed interference, it sparked absolute outrage. We're talking furious nobility, religious scholars, and everyday citizens. The Dutch had definitely crossed a line. And the response was explosive. Antasari aligned himself with that bypassed heir, Hidayatullah, and started secretly organizing. This tension all boiled over on April 25, 1859, with the legendary Pangeran attack. This was not a peaceful protest, folks. This was the thunderous official start of the Banjar War. Antasari led this highly disciplined secret coalition of about 300 warriors in a devastating surprise attack on the Dutch-operated Orange Nassau coal mine in Pangeran. They completely destroyed the mine and wiped out the entire colonial garrison guarding it. The message here was unmistakable. The Banjar people were done being dictated to. And let's move forward and see how this initial spark led to a massive tactical mobilization. Now, we're getting to the absolute core focus of this explainer, the strategy that made Antasari such a formidable threat, bridging that massive cultural divide. Just look at the sheer scale of the groups he managed to bring together. On one hand, you've got the coastal Banjar Muslims. They were generally more urban, heavily involved in trade and practiced Islam. Then on the other hand, you have the inland Dayak traditionalists, which included incredibly diverse tribes like the Ngaju, the Bakumpai, the Siang, and the Murung. They lived deep in the interior and held on to their own traditional beliefs. Tactically speaking, combining them was genius. Antasari took the resources and intelligence networks of the coastal traders and merged them with the unparalleled jungle survival and combat skills of the inland tribes. He essentially forged two totally different worlds into a single, unified anti-colonial front. And this newly forged cross-ethnic alliance was immediately put to the test in a high-stakes, legendary military strike. In December 1859, they orchestrated the Burrito River ambush. Just picture it, a heavily armed, modern European steamship trying to clumsily navigate a dense, unforgiving jungle river. It was essentially a sitting duck for a united guerrilla force just waiting in the shadows. Antasari's strategic planning combined flawlessly with the fierce Dayak warriors led by Tumenggung Suropati. By using the Banjar's intimate knowledge of the river networks, alongside the Dayak's total mastery of the dense terrain, this cross-ethnic coalition didn't just attack the ship, they literally sank the HNLMS Onerst straight to the bottom of the Barito River. They eliminated the Dutch commander, Lieutenant van der Velde, and his entire crew. It was a strategic masterpiece that proved without a doubt the terrifying power of their newfound unity. And as you can imagine, those kinds of victories fundamentally shift how a leader is viewed by their people. Look at this rapid, meteoric timeline. From launching that initial attack at Pangeran in April 1859 to sinking the Onrust that December, his leadership was just undeniable. Eventually, the Dutch actually exiled his ally, Hidayatollah, in 1861, which only galvanized the resistance even further. So, on March 14, 1862, regional governors, religious scholars, and crucially, Dayak tribal chiefs from the interior all convened. Together, they formally crowned Pangeran Antasari as the 20th Sultan of Banjar. But he didn't just take the standard title of Sultan. He assumed a much more profound title, Panembahan Amiruddin Khalifatul Mu'minin, which translates to the supreme religious and political leader of the faithful. By taking this specific title, Antasari fundamentally transformed the conflict. It was no longer just some dynastic dispute over a throne. It was an all-out, unified religious and territorial defense against foreign domination. Of course, the colonial machine wasn't just going to let this happen. They became desperate to stop him. 10,000 guilders. That is the massive bounty the Dutch colonial government slapped on his head. They sent multiple envoys trying to bribe him, offering pardons, generous stipends, and vast tracts of land if he would just capitulate. But where the Dutch tried to use money and status to divide and conquer, Antasari relied on the raw, unshakable unity of his people. He refused every single offer. He even put his refusal in writing. In a famous letter to Dutch Lieutenant Colonel Gustav Verspijk in July 1861, Antasari wrote with absolute conviction, "We firmly explain to you, we disagree with any proposals of mercy, and we strive to continue to claim our rightful inheritance." He absolutely rejected their pardons. He wasn't fighting for a personal stipend, he was fighting for the sovereignty of his homeland. Tragically, while he was establishing a central stronghold in Muara Towe and preparing a massive new offensive against Dutch outposts, a smallpox epidemic swept through his camp. Weakened by the disease, Pangeran Antasari died on October 11, 1862. But it's so important to note that he died among his troops. He died a free man, never having been captured, and never once submitting to colonial authority. And his resistance didn't die with him. It was immediately taken up by his son, Sultan Muhammad Saman, who continued the fight for decades. And this brilliantly illustrates the monumental impact he had while he was alive. He successfully achieved this incredibly difficult cross-ethnic unity along the Burrito River. He set an unmatched precedent for uncompromising resistance against foreign occupiers. He shifted a royal family feud into a genuine movement of popular sovereignty, supported by common citizens and tribal chiefs alike. And he gave his people a motto that would outlive him by generations. For all of these incredible achievements, he was officially recognized as a National Hero of Indonesia in 1968. Today, his legacy of unity is quite literally woven into the fabric of modern Indonesia. His face is proudly featured on the 2,000 rupiah banknote, and his name graces streets and schools all across the country. And that motto he coined, it remains one of the most powerful battle cries in history. Haram menyerah, wajah sampai ka punting. Forbidden to surrender, steadfast until the very end. It is the ultimate summary of his uncompromising spirit and his unwavering devotion to his people. So as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with this thought to reflect on. When we look at the world today, what can modern movements learn from Pangeran Antasari's absolute dedication to cross-cultural unity? How can bridging our own cultural divides make us stronger against the challenges we face today? Thank you so much for joining us, and keep asking those big questions.